The biggest purchase you're probably going to make in your Christmas decorating is your Christmas tree. So today I wanted to share with you 7 tips on what to consider when you are choosing the perfect tree for your home. Hi, I'm Nicole from mychristmas.com.au and this is our decorating tip series. Okay, so as I mentioned, I think there are 7 things to consider when you're purchasing your Christmas tree. So let's go through each of them and see if it'll help you work out which is the perfect tree for your home. So first of all is height. That's pretty obvious. I'm going to give my measurements in both feet and meters because I know people are watching this overseas and in Australia. So a standard ceiling in Australia is 2.4 meters or 8 feet tall. I see from a lot of the videos over in the US that you may have taller ceilings than that. But it is really important if your ceiling height is standard to measure it and see how far you can go. You want to allow a little bit of room at the top for an angel, a star or a spray to come out of your tree. So therefore, think about that as well. I think the minimum you want is 15 centimeters or 6 inches. Personally, I like to go to more like 30 centimeters or 12 inches or a foot between the top of my tree and my ceiling. And that gives me a little bit of room to play with my topper, but also means it doesn't look like it's too big for the room. So if your ceilings are an issue, then that's something to consider. At the other end, if your ceilings are really tall, then you don't want to go too small. I found from my experience that a tree that's 1.98 meters or 6.5 feet generally looks okay in most rooms. I mean, if you have a really large room, it's still going to look small. But if you go down that little bit smaller to the 6 foot or 1.8 meter, I often find they can look a little bit like a pimple on a pumpkin and they just don't look quite big enough to fill the room. So if you've got big ceilings, I'd go anywhere from sort of 1.98 or 6.5 foot and up from there. Okay, the second thing we want to look at is the width of the tree. So again, looking at your space and looking at your use of the space and how many people you have over Christmas Day. You can't, unfortunately, have a massive Christmas tree if you've got a small living room and you're going to have 20 relatives and friends coming over on Christmas Day. So think about your space and your width. So you do want to measure the width. Most trees will give you the sort of tip to tip minimum floor space that you need to house that tree comfortably in the space. Just remember, and I think you might be able to see here, the tips are, bend. So if, for example, your space, let's just say it's 1.5 meters or 5 foot, but your tree is 1.8 feet, 6 foot. You may be able to just bend the branches out at the back of the tree, just enough to sort of push that tree in against the wall or against a piece of furniture or in the corner there to save a bit of floor space. So you don't want to do too much of that, but it will help you, if height and sort of grandness is important to you, then it may allow you to get a bigger size tree into the room. I'm going to give you a little tip on hook-on versus hinge branches in a moment, and that will also help with another kind of thing you consider when you're looking at the floor space that you need. If you have a small amount of floor space, you may prefer to go with a slimmer tree. So the tree I use in my office, I've got a very small space here. It's only about 70 centimeters or just over 2 feet. This tree needs more than that, but I take a couple of branches out of the bottom. I wanted height, so I've gone with a 2.28 meter high tree, so 7.5 foot. So I've got as much tree as I can get in here, but still be able to work in the space. And therefore the slim model was a really great option. If you've got a lot of floor space, then you may be looking for a wide tree to fill that space. So just think about height and floor space are the sort of the primary areas that you want to look at to begin with. Now, some of the trees that we have are lit and some are unlit. I know if you're watching this and you're overseas, I find most of your trees are lit trees, so this may not be quite as relevant to you, but you may find, just in case you're given options, it's worth having a little tune in. In Australia, we have a lot of both. So a lit tree means that the lights are attached to the tree already, and that means that you don't have to wind the lights through the tree to set up each year and to take them off. So sometimes with time, that's something to consider. So that's the pro of a lit tree. I really think it's important thinking about the cons of a lit tree as well. I have both in my home. So this tree is actually lit by us. So this is an unlit tree, and I have a flocked tree that comes with lights. I'll be honest, I would prefer it to be unlit because I do worry about lights. Lights can break, the wiring can break over time. You generally find a warranty on a tree. The foliage itself is a lot longer than the warranty on the tree lights. So if you're looking for that tree to last you 10, 15 years, then a lit tree may not get you there. All right, so that's one thing to think about. The other thing is, when you're thinking about the time it takes to light a tree, we have some tips on how you can light the tree. We wind the lights down the tree rather than around them, makes it a lot easier. And I think that people forget that the main thing that should take time in is fluffing the branches of the tree so that it looks beautiful and full, whereas the actual lighting of it shouldn't take as long. When you have a tree that is lit, it's hinged, and I'll take you through again. I find that a little bit more difficult to set up than the other option. So at this stage, we've got height to consider, your width, and then also looking at whether you want a lit or an unlit tree, and just remembering, think about those cons as well. So maybe if you see the perfect tree that's unlit, you might go, all right, let's consider that, and then buy the lights separately, and we'll show you easy ways to put them on. There's already a video out there that you can watch to show you how we light our trees, and it's much, much faster than it used to be. All right, so the next thing to consider is if the tree has hook-on branches or hinged. Again, if your tree is lit, it will definitely be hinged. And what I mean by this is, when you take your tree out of the box, you're going to have 2 or 3 long pieces that you put into your pole. You've got your stand, and then you have the bottom pole, and it will already have the branches attached to the pole, and you put 3 pieces together and your tree is built. That is called a hinged tree. A hook-on tree is when you have each of the individual branches. So each level here has like 6 branches with lots of tips on each one, and they are separate from the pole itself. And that means you might start by, what I do when I do our tree is we lay out the branches into each of their colors. They have a little color coding on the end of each branch, and I lay them out into each color lot, and then I build the tree because my pole tells me which color I need on each level. So you're probably even listening to this going, oh my God, why would you bother with that? It's so much easier doing a hinged tree. That's what I thought when I first started this business. We've been doing this for 17 years now, and I would personally prefer to build a hook-on tree, or fluff up and create a hook-on tree over a hinged tree any day. And that's one of the reasons I would actually personally prefer that my hinged lit tree was actually a hook-on model, but it didn't come as that. So let me explain why. When you have 3 sections of tree and they all go in together, when you fluff the branches, and it's really important to get to the back of the branches and get those branches right up so that you get lovely fullness to your tree. If you don't fluff the branches out, doesn't matter how much you pay for a tree, it's just going to not look as good as it should. All right, so taking the time to fluff those branches out is important. When the branches are already attached to the tree, it means you've got to bend down, hold up levels above, and get in there and fluff out all the branches. If you're bending down all the time at the bottom of the tree, it takes a lot more work. When we do a hinged tree, what I'm just demonstrating here with this little video is we hook the branches up at a higher level and then fluff the branches out and then put them in place. At home, we actually sit around and each of us sits there and fluffs the branches, just sitting on the couch, and my husband goes and just puts the branches in place. So we're not bending down when we're setting up the tree. So I find that is so much easier. Another thing to consider with the difference between a hook-on and a hinged tree, and where I think there's a bit of an advantage to the hook-on, as I said, even though you've got to lay those branches out for the extra 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the beginning of the season, is the packaging up of the box. It's much more compact. So if space is important to you, then that will mean that your hook-on tree will be a lot more compact and easier for you to store away in the off-season. The other thing that I think is also worth considering is if you're particularly getting a larger tree and it's a a hinged tree, that bottom piece is quite heavy and quite big. If you're frail or smaller build or not strong, and you're trying to put that tree base in place, the base piece, it can be a little tricky. And so when you have individual branches, it means that you can very easily just work one row at a time, and you don't have a whole lot of weight to deal with the tree. So I hope the differences between those two kind of becomes a little bit clearer, and something that you probably in the past wouldn't have thought of. And as I said, if you're getting a lip tree, you've got no choice, but it's something you may like to consider in the difference between the two. Particularly with the trees we carry here in mychristmas.com.au, we have a lot of hook-on tree trees, they're commercial grade, and I just find them so much easier. I know my installer, every time I say to her, oh, this one's hinged, she's like, oh no. So anyway, something that is worth considering. All right, so height, width, lit, unlit, hinged or hook on. Next one is color. So if you want a tree that is flocked or white, they look beautiful. And as I said, I've got one myself. Possibly the flocking isn't going to last as long as a green tree. So that's something else to think about when you're considering the investment, and whether you know you're someone who goes, oh, I'm going to want to change my tree in 5 years anyway, or it's something that you want to last a long time. So I would therefore think about what the overall look is. Have a look on Pinterest, have a look on our website, our Instagram, and other beautiful decorators out there to see what you like as the base color of the tree that they're using. Flocked has become very popular, even in Australia, even though it's a summer Christmas and it's sunny. Just a lot of people love the look of having that white base, or more white base to the tree rather than green. But if you want longevity, then sometimes the tree that I think is a better option is the green tree. And what I do myself is I simply add some flocked foliage pieces into the tree if I want that sort of snowy effect, as a way of getting that softness to the tree, but it means I don't have it as flocked year upon year. So that's another way you can work both. Of course, you can go with other bright colored trees as well. If you have a white tree too, I have found in the past sometimes being a little bit more careful of where you store it. So the heat in the space can be important, so it doesn't brown the foliage of the tree. So something else that just be mindful of where you're going to put it. And another one I think that people don't necessarily think about is who's going to be dressing the tree. And you might not have even thought of this yourself, but the reason it's so important to me is I used to go to my grandparents when I was a kid, and I would always put up their little tree. It was only like a 1.5 meter, 5 foot, maybe probably even smaller tree. And it was a great tradition that I thoroughly enjoyed. I was luckily the oldest grandchild, so it was my job to do. But I do remember that tree had a very big bristle that was very hard. So on little hands, I still remember that it wasn't a pleasant foliage to touch. And even with the tree I've got behind me, this is our Cambridge, some of this foliage is quite hard, and something like this, and big and fat and full. It would be tricky for little hands. So if you want the kids to help dressing the tree, if your whole tree had just these big fat foliage and a harder needle, it would be really tricky for them to help you put the decorations on the tree. Whereas this tree has a mix, so it has some finer needle pieces in here as well. And so that's a lot easier for the kids to handle. If you happen to be looking at the My Christmas website, the Vienna is the softest foliage. It also has soft foliage that comes all the way over the wire ends on it. And so that's something else that makes it safer for kids to use, and something to consider. So I think if you want the children involved in the decorating, think about the size of the individual tips on the tree to see if it is something that they will be able to help you with. Or if you've got grandkids, and I know a lot of people downsize their tree, have the grandkids still involved in that process. So you want to think about what you're going to have and who's going to be dressing that with you. And then the final one that I think is really important is budget. Everyone has a budget, so there's no embarrassment in saying you've got a budget for a Christmas tree. But what I think is important is the tree is the piece that you're going to keep for the longest time. So if your budget is, whatever the amount is that your budget is, $200, $300, $500, $2,000, whatever it is, doesn't matter. I would suggest that if it's the first year you're setting up your tree, or you've just got a few decorations, but you see a tree you love that's maybe a little bit higher, and you've got an overall budget for your Christmas decorating and including your tree, I would say that for the first year you might be better spending a bit more on the tree and less on the decorations. You can always add more decorations the following year. They are very easily added. You can't easily change a tree if you've invested in a tree that you don't love or isn't quite up to the standard that you want. So think about your overall spend on Christmas. If you see a tree that you really love but it's a little bit dearer, then you may want to go with that and buy less. You can even go without lights in the first year if you wanted to, or have less lights and add more the following year. They are all things that can be added year upon year. It's part of the collecting process and part of even changing out your themes and so forth. So invest in the piece that you're going to have for a long time and then build around it. So quite a bit of information there. I hope you found that useful. Christmas trees, as I said, on our website, mychristmas.com.au, we can only send in Australia. They'd be far too expensive to send worldwide, but we do ship throughout Australia. We do share different videos on how you set up the trees, and I'm going to create a video on that as well to show you how you set the branches, how you get the most out of your tree, because it's really important that you do that as well. Invest in a good tree, fluff it up nicely, and it doesn't matter how few decorations you've got on there, it's going to look stunning for you. So I hope, as I said, this has been useful. mychristmas.com.au. Our YouTube channel is here with lots of decorating tips, so make sure you subscribe if you found this useful, or if you're looking on for tips on how to decorate as well. Thanks again for joining me. Have a sensational day. See you. Bye.